She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just curled into the hay behind the mule stall, trying to disappear like a woman who had been trained not to take up space. And when Harlan, the widowed rancher, found her there, barefoot, bruised, and silent, he didn't ask her to explain. He brought her stew. He left the barn door unlocked. He waited. And that's when the story truly began. Because what he didn't know, what we weren't told, was that this woman, Clara, had once been married to a man who called her useless the day she went deaf, and treated her like less than livestock after that. She had escaped. But where do you run when no one hears you? When no one waits for your words, you find a barn. You find warmth. You find a man who doesn't ask for answers, only pulls up a second chair. But what happened next when a letter arrives claiming Clara as property? When the man from her past rides into town, fists full of law and rage? When Clara for the first time writes in chalk, "I am not what they said I was," do you think she runs again? Or does the man who lost everything choose this time to stand between her and the storm? This isn't a story about rescue. It's a story about waiting, about presence, about what happens when a woman who was silenced for too long is finally given back a place to speak even without sound. What did she say with her hands that no one else had ever heard? What stitched message did she sew into the quilt now resting on their bed? And how did a tree that hadn't bloomed in 15 years bear fruit the moment she sat beneath it? If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to be seen, if you've ever whispered your name just to remember it belongs to you, then maybe this story is also yours. Stay with us to hear the rest, because sometimes all it takes is one man with a quiet porch and one woman brave enough to sit down. The wind had come in sharp that morning, dry and quick, rushing down from the north, like it had something urgent to say. Harlan Stokes felt it against his neck as he stepped out onto the porch, sipping coffee from a dented tin cup, squinting toward the ridge. He didn't mind the wind. It moved things, woke things up, stirred what had settled too long. He was 60 come November, a man built from weather and quiet days. A widower going on 8 years. His hands were more useful than his words, and his life was stitched together from feed sacks early mornings, and the way horses always seem to know more than people. He was walking to the barn when he noticed the door ajar. That in itself was unusual. Harlan wasn't the sort to forget things, especially not latches on barn doors with winter coming. He paused at the threshold. Something felt still. Not empty exactly, but held. He stepped inside. The smell hit him first, hay, old wood, and something faint beneath it, something human. He heard the rustle before he saw her, bare feet, tucked behind the haystack near the far stall. Just the edge of a skirt and one shoulder thin and bruised with a yellowing mark, like she'd leaned against the wrong man for too long. She didn't move. He didn't speak. She looked up slowly and met his eyes. There was no panic, no words. Just a woman crouched low dirt on her knees, watching him, like a creature that had long since stopped asking for kindness. Harlan didn't call the sheriff, didn't demand her name. He just backed away a step, then nodded once, as if to say, "You're here. I see you." And then he went back to the house. That night he brought a bowl of warm stew out to the barn. He set it near the hay, didn't linger. When he returned the next morning, the bowl was empty. She was still there. She stayed 3 nights before venturing out. One afternoon, he saw her standing in the garden rows, barefoot, still staring at the wind-bent corn stalks like she'd never seen a place not locked from the outside. He stepped out from the porch. She didn't run. He raised a hand. She didn't wave back, but her eyes tracked him carefully. "Name's Harlan," he said. No answer. Then he noticed it, her eyes on his lips, her slight tilt of the head, the way she didn't react to the rooster crowing just behind her. She was deaf. He nodded again, slower this time, and turned back to the house. That evening, he lit the stove in the guest room, swept the dust, set a basin of warm water and a folded towel beside it. Then he left the door open. Just a little. Some people don't come looking for help. They come hoping not to be seen. But even a barn can recognize when someone's been carrying too much for too long. The first morning she came inside, it was cold enough to leave frost on the windows. Harlan had set a mug of coffee on the table, another one beside it filled with hot water and lemon. He didn't know what she drank, didn't know what she preferred, but he'd noticed how her hands trembled at night and how her breath came shallow when the wind blew hard against the walls of the barn. She stepped in barefoot, the hem of her skirt still torn, holding herself like someone unsure whether she belonged. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, eyes darting not in panic, just alert. He didn't speak. She didn't either. But she took the lemon water, sipped, and sat down slowly at the edge of the wooden chair across from him. Over the next few days, they shared a kind of rhythm. He'd prepare breakfast and leave it on the table. She'd clean the dishes and set them on the drying rack, everything neatly arranged by size. He noticed she always left the fork facing east. Maybe it was habit, maybe ritual, maybe it was her way of making a place hers. They didn't exchange names. Not yet. But there was a moment midweek when she was folding the blankets and he passed behind her. Close but careful, and she didn't flinch. Not even a little. That's when he knew the silence between them wasn't emptiness. It was beginning to hold something. Harlan was a man of few words even on his best day. But now with her, this woman who could not hear and maybe did not speak, he became observant in ways he hadn't been for years. He noticed the way she traced her finger along the edge of the kitchen window every morning, like she was remembering something. The way she reached for objects with grace even when her hands were shaking. The way she closed her eyes, often not to sleep, but to feel stillness from the inside out. He started drawing pictures on the back of paper bags. Simple things: a loaf of bread, a sun, a broom. Each one followed by the word printed underneath, big and careful. She watched. She nodded. And one day she picked up the pencil and drew a house, then tapped her chest. He blinked. She drew a barn, then tapped the space between her ribs. He stared at the two drawings, then looked at her. She pointed to the barn again, slowly tapped it twice, then laid her hand over her heart. She had chosen the barn over the house. That was where she felt safest. That evening, while Harlan swept the porch, he found the windowsill wiped clean and a single word written into the thin film of dust: Clara. He stood looking at it for a long time, said it aloud once, Clara, just to try it on. That night he lit the lamp beside the guest bed and left it burning low. When he passed the doorway later, she was asleep, her face relaxed, one hand curled beneath her cheek like a child's. The light was still glowing, and for the first time since he'd buried Martha, the house felt like something more than four walls waiting for night. Some names aren't spoken, they're revealed. And when they are, they settle like a seed in soil that's waited too long for rain. The trouble didn't come on horseback. It came folded in a letter. Harlan found it wedged beneath the porch door one afternoon, the paper stiff and creased sharp. The handwriting was the sort that left no room for softness. Each letter pressed deep into the page like the man behind it had something to prove. He read the name twice before he sat down. Donnelly, Abel Donnelly, the brother of Clara's late husband. The letter said she'd gone missing, said the estate had unresolved debts and that any property in her possession, including her, was subject to return. Return, as if she were a coat or a mule. Harlan read the line 3 times, then folded the letter, then lit a match and burned it in the stove without saying a word. That evening he found Clara outside by the chicken coop, scattering feed like she always did, delicate, patient. Her eyes half closed in the late afternoon light. He walked toward her with steady steps, stopped just short of where she could feel the vibration of his boots on the ground. She turned, saw his face. He didn't need to speak. She knew. That night she didn't come in for supper. He waited an hour, then walked to the barn. She was in the hayloft, knees to her chest, staring into the darkness. She didn't look at him, didn't move when the ladder creaked beneath his boots. He sat at a distance, said nothing, but he saw it the way her chest barely rose and fell, the way her jaw tensed against whatever she couldn't scream. She had been claimed once, and it had cost her more than anyone should ever pay. The next morning he left a slate and a stub of chalk on the table. He didn't explain it, just left it there beside the biscuits. It sat untouched for 2 days. Then one night when the wind rose and the windows rattled, she came in from the barn with the board clutched tight in her hands. She set it on the table. Her fingers trembled as she wrote slowly with a kind of careful pain. I'm not what they said I was. Harlan read the words. He didn't ask what they'd said. Didn't need to. He knelt down to the wood bin, pulled out a clean board, and wrote back, I never believed them. They didn't write again for a while. But something broke open that night, not in anger, not in fear, but like a locked room letting in fresh air after years of stale silence. And when she walked past him on her way to bed, she brushed her hand lightly against his arm. Just for a second, but enough to say, thank you for not asking me to go. Some doors are never meant to be kicked open. They're meant to be weighted beside until the person inside finds the strength to lift the latch. The first stitch came before dawn. Clara sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched under her shawl, a candle flickering low beside a basket of worn fabric scraps. She had asked for nothing, but Harlan had left the box of old clothes beside the door anyway, just in case. She had sorted them carefully: flannel, from cotton dark, from light soft, from rough. Her hands moved with memory. Thread through fabric, needle through memory. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just began. By midday, a pattern emerged. Not pretty, not symmetrical, but real. Each square stitched with purpose, one from her old coat, one from Harlan's frayed workshirt, one from the apron she'd found folded neatly in the back of the pantry. The apron had once belonged to Martha, though neither of them said it out loud. He watched her work from the porch, letting the screen door creak without fixing it. He didn't ask what the quilt was for. He just made sure the fire stayed lit late, so she had light to sew by. Outside, the wind carried dust and dry leaves across the porch. Inside, the air grew gentler. Clara began to smile more, not with her mouth, but with her shoulders, her hands, the way her eyes lingered on things, like sunlight through a window or a robin hopping along the fence line. Harlan taught her wildflower names, drawing rough sketches in the dirt: lupine, primrose, Indian paintbrush. She taught him the signs for "thank you, safe." And one afternoon, as the air cooled home, the man came 2 weeks later, not loud, not angry, just persistent. Abel Donnelly rode up like he already owned the place, his horse too clean, his boots untouched by real work. He dismounted without invitation and knocked on the door like he expected it to open just because his hand had touched it. Harlan stepped outside. "Looking for someone," Abel said. "Widow by the name of Clara Donnelly. Went missing a while back. Belongs to the family. Got signatures, seals." Harlan looked down at the papers, then back up. "She's not missing," he said evenly. "And she doesn't belong to anyone." Abel raised his eyebrows. "You keeping her here?" "Hiding her. I didn't keep her." "She stayed." Abel stepped forward. "That's not how the law sees it." Harlan didn't blink. "Then tell the law to come see me." Clara watched from inside. She had stood behind too many doors before holding her breath, but this time she stepped out. She didn't shout, didn't sign. She just stood beside Harlan, her hand resting on his forearm, her chin lifted. Abel looked between them, lips twitching with something that couldn't quite become a smirk. "Suit yourselves," he muttered. "But this ain't the last of it." He rode off. The dust settled, and no one followed. That night, Harlan found her quilt spread out across the bed. It was nearly finished. She had added a small stitched square in the bottom corner, tiny flowers in blue thread, and beneath them, in a curve of steady, quiet stitches, "Mine." She wasn't just mending fabric. She was repairing the story that had once been written for her, and now she was writing her own. Summer softened into fall. The edges of the trees turned first, then the fields, then the sky itself, which began to burn gold at dusk and rest heavy with stars by night. Clara had moved into the house weeks ago, but only recently had she taken to sitting in the window seat. It faced east toward the hill where the light came first each morning. The cushion was worn from years of emptiness, but she had tucked her quilt beneath her legs and filled that space like she was meant to. She watched the wind move through the grass. The deer passed silent at the fence line. Sometimes just the clouds. She didn't need the window to be open. She liked seeing the world move even without sound. Harlan would glance at her sometimes as he passed, bringing wood in, drying dishes. He'd look, then look away. But each day he lingered longer. One afternoon he sat across from her, not to interrupt but simply to be near. He held out a book. It was old, yellowed, a reader's primer with large print and wide margins. Inside he'd written phonetic cues in pencil. Then beside them he'd drawn small pictures. He tapped the page. She tilted her head, studying his lips. He formed the word slowly: apple. She smiled, then pointed to the tree out back where small fruit had begun to hang low. He nodded, then turned the page. They kept going like that for weeks, 15 minutes at a time most evenings. Not always with the book. Sometimes with gestures, sometimes with chalk and slate. Once just with touch, the back of her hand brushing his palm as he passed her the sugar bowl. One evening she signed something, slowly, fingers trembling just a little. He didn't catch it at first. She repeated it, then tapped her chest. He sat up straighter. "Name." She nodded. He pressed a hand gently to his own chest. Harlan. Then he signed it back. Clumsy, hesitant. She laughed a soundless flutter of shoulders and breath. Then slowly she signed again. Do you miss her? He didn't answer right away, just looked down at his hands, then looked up at her, lips shaping the words one at a time. I miss her less. When you're near. She didn't reply, just reached for the slate board. She wrote one word, warm, then pushed it toward him. That night the fire burned longer. The room stayed quiet, not empty, not lonely, just lived in. She didn't speak. He barely did. But somehow they understood each other more than anyone ever had before. Summer softened into fall. The edges of the trees turned first, then the fields, then the sky itself, which began to burn gold at dusk and rest heavy with stars by night. Clara had moved into the house weeks ago, but only recently had she taken to sitting in the window seat. It faced east toward the hill, where the light came first each morning. The cushion was worn from years of emptiness, but she had tucked her quilt beneath her legs and filled that space like she was meant to. She watched the wind move through the grass. The deer passed silent at the fence line, sometimes just the clouds. She didn't need the window to be open. She liked seeing the world move even without sound. Harlan would glance at her sometimes as he passed, bringing wood in, drying dishes. He'd look, then look away, but each day he lingered longer. One afternoon he sat across from her, not to interrupt, but simply to be near. He held out a book. It was old, yellowed, a reader's primer with large print and wide margins. Inside he'd written phonetic cues in pencil. Then beside them he'd drawn small pictures. He tapped the page. She tilted her head, studying his lips. He formed the word slowly, apple. She smiled, then pointed to the tree out back where small fruit had begun to hang low. He nodded, then turned the page. They kept going like that for weeks, 15 minutes at a time most evenings. Not always with the book, sometimes with gestures, sometimes with chalk and slate. Once just with touch the back of her hand brushing his palm as he passed her the sugar bowl. One evening she signed something slowly, fingers trembling just a little. He didn't catch it at first. She repeated it, then tapped her chest. He sat up straighter. Name? She nodded. He pressed a hand gently to his own chest. Harlan. Then he signed it back. Clumsy, hesitant. She laughed a soundless flutter of shoulders and breath. Then slowly she signed again. Do you miss her? He didn't answer right away, just looked down at his hands, then looked up at her, lips shaping the words one at a time. I miss her less. When you're near. She didn't reply, just reached for the slate board. She wrote one word, warm, then pushed it toward him. That night the fire burned longer. The room stayed quiet, not empty, not lonely, just lived in. She didn't speak. He barely did. But somehow they understood each other more than anyone ever had before. The tree in the back pasture had never borne fruit. Old-timers said it was too tired, too shaded. Said it had once belonged to Martha Harlan's late wife, who had planted it during their first spring on the land. For years it had stood withered still and stubborn, dropping only brown leaves in autumn. But that year with Clara, now sitting most mornings beneath its branches, reading quietly from the book he'd marked up, something changed. By September the tree had bloomed late. Tiny green apples clung shyly to its limbs. No one said anything. But Harlan watched them each morning, like a man witnessing something he didn't dare name. Clara had grown stronger too, her cheeks fuller, her steps more assured. She wore shoes again and a long wool coat Harlan had found in the attic. She had mended it herself and added blue stitching to the collar, like ivy growing along stone. She started baking again, cornbread, apple tarts, biscuits folded with butter and herbs. He never asked her to, and she never asked for praise. But each time he cleaned the plate, she smiled a little differently, like it mattered. One morning, the neighbor's youngest daughter, Elsie, showed up crying, the way only small children cry when the world feels too big. Her mama was birthing another baby. The midwife was late. There was panic in the kitchen, too many voices. Clara knelt down, smoothed the child's hair back, then signed something slowly. It's okay. She didn't expect the girl to understand, but somehow she did. And within the hour, Clara was at the neighbor's house, calm and focused. She moved like someone who had once done this before. Hands, steady voice, silent eyes never flinching. The baby came just past noon, and the rancher's wife wept into Clara's shawl. "You saved us," she whispered. Clara just shook her head, then signed she did the saving. Word spread like it does in places where people still listen to stories over soup. They began to call her the woman with the quiet hands. Children followed her to the garden. Widows invited her for quilting circles. Men tipped their hats when they passed. No one asked what had happened to her before. They only wanted to know what she'd plant next spring. That Christmas, Harlan built her a loom. He had to carve it by hand. Took 3 weeks, and the tips of 2 fingers lost their feeling for a while. But he finished it just before the first snow. When she saw it, her knees buckled slightly. She reached for the wood, touched it like it was sacred, then turned to him with tears filling her eyes. He held out his hand. She placed hers inside it. No words, just that. She hadn't just found a home. She had become one woven into the lives of others, not by sound, but by presence. Winter settled like a hush across the valley. The fields turned pale and still. The horses grew heavier with their coats. The air held its breath longer each morning before the sun arrived. And in Harlan's house, everything slowed down in kind. Meals stretched a little longer. Evenings lingered beside the fire. Words few and far between meant more when spoken. But more often than not, it was the silence that spoke. Clara had finished the quilt. It now lay across their shared bed, patchworked from pieces of old life and new of sorrow and kindness, stitched into one long, quiet story. A single line of thread ran from one corner to the other, a faint shimmer of blue. She had sewn it blindfolded, just that one stitch to remind herself that even without seeing the path, her hands knew how to find home. Outside, the apple tree had not lost all its fruit. They hung like small golden promises through the first frost, defiant and bright. Harlan brought in a few, laid them in a bowl by the window. Neither of them spoke of it, but she touched one every morning. The 2 rocking chairs had been moved close. One faced the fire, one faced the window. They sat in both throughout the day, sometimes separately, sometimes side by side. Once Harlan found her asleep in the one by the window, the quilt draped over her lap, her lips parted in the softest half-smile. He didn't wake her. He just pulled a shawl over her shoulders and sat beside her. On New Year's Eve, they shared cornbread and black-eyed peas as Martha had once done. No toast, no countdown, just warmth. And a moment near midnight when Clara reached for his hand and signed, "This is enough." He nodded, then slowly signed back, "You are enough." Later that winter, a child from the valley asked Clara if she missed talking. She knelt beside him, smiling, and wrote this on the slate, "I speak with my hands now. I listen with my eyes. But it's my heart that finally feels heard." Somewhere between the barn and the back door, a life had been rebuilt. Not loudly, not all at once, but in small pieces, in a quilt, in a tree, in the space between 2 chairs. Clara Mae Donnelly had once hidden from the world, but the world, or at least one quiet man with good hands, had waited for her to come back, and she had, without a voice, but not without a name. She didn't just find her voice again. She gave it shape in silence, in warmth, and in love that asked nothing but to stay. Some stories aren't loud. They don't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. They unfold slowly in barns beside firelight, beneath the branches of an old apple tree. And sometimes they begin when someone chooses to stay, when a man doesn't turn away, and when a woman long silenced dares to take up space again. Clara didn't find her voice in words. She found it in presence, in stitching kindness back into her own life, in reaching for someone and realizing he wasn't letting go. And Harlan didn't save her. He simply offered a porch, a cup, in his time. Maybe that's something we all need, not grand gestures, but quiet spaces where we are seen, heard, and held, where we're not rushed to heal, but invited to rest. If this story touched something in you, we invite you to stay a while longer right here with us at None, Wild West Saga. Subscribe for more stories of healing love and late-blooming hope. Share this with someone who believes it's never too late to begin again. And in the comments, tell us, would you like to see what happens next for Clara and Harlan, or hear more stories of quiet redemption from the Old West? Your presence here matters. And as Clara might sign, this is enough. And you are too.